Hey guys, how's it going? So UFC 318 is this weekend. I'm going to run through the card and give you guys my picks and predictions for all of the fights on this card, so let's just get straight into it. And opening up the early prelims is Carli Judice versus Nicolle Caliari. So Carli Judice debuted in the UFC against Gabriela Fernandez in a really close fight where Fernandez took the second with her takedowns and grappling, but Judice kept it competitive, taking the third by keeping it on the feet and boxing Fernandez. And in the first round, it was ultimately given to Fernandez, but it was really close, and an impressive debut performance from Judice against a really tricky opponent in Fernandez. She's taken down some of the best like Wang Kong, so not a bad loss by any means. Outside of that, her only other fight was against Eunice Dubin recently, in a fight where out of nowhere in the first round, she lands this perfectly placed head kick, put Dubin down. Dubin's quite dangerous as well on the feet. She has quite a bit of power in her hands. And Judice ultimately won a performance bonus for that fight, so a very good second performance from her there. Nicolle Caliari only one fight within the UFC with her debut against Ernesta Caracate in the fight where Caliari was sort of getting outperformed badly on the feet. Did have moments throughout the fight where her takedowns and grappling would come in and she'd make it competitive, but in the end she lost a split decision in a pretty average performance. Against a pretty average opponent at that. And while Caliari does present a grappling threat, I think Judice does have some pretty good takedown defense and defensive wrestling of her own. And if the fight stays on the feet, I think Judice is just leagues above Caliari when it comes to the striking. So I'm going to go with Carli Judice by a decision win for this one. And next up is Brunno Ferreira versus Jackson McVey. So Brunno Ferreira was supposed to fight Ikram Aliskerov. Aliskerov broke his foot before this fight, had to pull out of it. McVey stepped up short notice, and I think this is a very dangerous fight for someone like McVey to take, especially on short notice against someone like Ferreira. He has some very dangerous striking, some of the most dangerous I'd say in the whole UFC, with a lot of power in his shots. He demonstrated that with his first round spinning elbow knockout over Justin Stoltzfus. He showed how dangerous he can be if the fight gets left standing. There is a hole in his game that somewhat got exposed by Abbas Magomedov when they fought at UFC 308. Magomedov just kept taking Ferreira down, tiring him out very early in the fight, taking away a lot of his power, and then in the third actually managed to submit him halfway through the round with an arm triangle. So it looked pretty bad there, but recently Ferreira has come back. It seems like he's worked on that area of his game with his fight at UFC 313 against Armen Petrosyan, ending late in the second round, when Ferreira was able to take Petrosyan down and very quickly found an armbar submission, which he managed to sink in, submitted Petrosyan. And in this fight, Ferreira was constantly pushing for those takedowns, and he was the one actually pushing the grappling, so maybe that might be his approach here. His opponent, Jackson McVey, was supposed to fight Cedric Damas at UFC 317, got changed to Christopher Ewart, who missed weight, so McVey got moved to this card. And while McVey does have some very impressive wins on smaller promotions, Brunno Ferreira is a whole nother level when compared to sort of the initial opponents he was supposed to be matched up with in his debut at UFC 316. And I think McVey is going to have a hard time adjusting, especially to such a dangerous striker in Ferreira, and I think if it gets left on the feet, it's going to be bad for him. If it gets taken to the ground, I think Ferreira can hold his own pretty decently. So I'm going to go with Brunno Ferreira by round 1 KO for this one. Moving on from that, we have Ryan Spann versus Lukasz Brzeski. So Ryan Spann most recently made his heavyweight debut against Waldo Cortez Acosta in a fight where he looked pretty bad. He was getting beat up pretty badly on the feet, taking some real damage. Wasn't able to get off one of his strongest tools in his arsenal, that being his grappling and his takedowns. And with the fight ending in the second round with a brutal left hook from Acosta that dropped Spann, had him out badly, followed up with ground and pound and put him out. It seems like heavyweight is sort of a division that is struggling to make his way into. Before that, Spann was a pretty tricky opponent though at light heavyweight. He was very skilled in all areas. He demonstrated against Ovince St. Preux at UFC 307, where Spann managed to catch Preux in a guillotine while he was shooting him for a takedown, locked it in very tight and submitted him very early in the first round with it. And while he is good in the grappling and can put up a pretty competitive fight on the fight, there are times within his record where one big hit from his opponent often changes the whole tide of the fight. It happened in the Bogdan Guskov fight where he got knocked down midway through the second after a very competitive first round and ultimately got put away with ground and pound after that, so I'm worried that he might get caught here. Lukasz Brzeski coming off a matchup against Kenny Nzechukwu at UFC 310 where for most of round 1 it was very even in the striking, with neither really even landing anything sort of fight taking or round taking. But late in the first round, Nzechukwu lands a right hook that puts Brzeski down, had him finish with some follow-up ground and pound. Before that, he also lost to Mick Parkin at UFC 304 in another fight where he got finished in the first round. He let the fight stay on the feet for the whole round. Midway through the round, Parkin hit Brzeski hard enough to wobble him, sort of sending him back on the feet against the cage, and then dropped him before finishing him with punches. He did manage to get a win over Walter Walker, which has aged very well when looking at Walker's recent performances, but this was a pretty bad performance from Walker. He couldn't really dominate in the grappling like he usually does, and ended up being forced to strike on the feet, which he isn't amazing at, with Brzeski picking up the fight in volume-wise. As the fight went on, won that decision. And while I think Brzeski has been put up against some really tough opponents recently, I think his biggest problem is that he never throws anything that looks like it would sort of heavily influence the fight, or definitely win a round. And he definitely doesn't look like he puts his opponents away very often. Meanwhile, Spann often throws big on the feet, can also mix in some grappling when he needs to, and I think will make a bigger statement each round. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Ryan Spann by round 2 KO for this one. Next up is Jimmy Crute versus Marcin Prachnio. So Jimmy Crute coming off a fight against Rodolfo Bilardo at UFC 312, where after 10-8ing Bilardo on all 3 judges' scorecards, almost having him finished at multiple points, he let the fight run away from him, with Bilardo outstriking and out-wrestling him in the second and third, and as a result, the fight ended in a draw. Before that, he rematched Alonzo Menefield after their first fight, also ended in a draw, mainly due to Menefield getting a point deduction in the third for grabbing the cage. And in this second fight, after a decently competitive first round, Menefield locked in a guillotine choke, submitted Crute midway through the second round. I think he would have won the first fight as well, so that one was sort of 2 losses, not technically, but still. And before that, he got absolutely brutalized in his fight against Jamahal Hill, with Hill landing a right hook a minute into the first round, dropped Crute, had him out badly, finishing the fight, but admittedly, this was during Hill's sort of rise to the title, and Hill was very, skilled at the time, looked unstoppable. So not the worst of losses. His opponent Marcin Prachnio most recently took on Modestas Bukauskas at UFC 304, where heading into the third it was one apiece, with Bukauskas looking better on the feet in the first, before Prachnio started to pick it up in the second, but ultimately it was Bukauskas taking down Prachnio and submitting him with an arm triangle midway through the third round that won Bukauskas that fight. Before that, Prachnio managed to get a fairly dominant decision over Devin Clark by outstriking him every round, even mixing in a takedown and some wrestling here and there, especially in the third, and taking a 30-27 dominant decision. Granted, not the hardest opponent, but still a good win. And while he can hold his own in the striking, it seems his grappling often lets him down. In his fight against Vitor Petrino at UFC 290, he was consistently getting taken down, out-wrestled throughout the whole fight. Petrino managed to lock in an arm triangle midway through the third and actually submitted Prachnio. So, kind of a rough fight there. And this would normally be concerning, but I think in a matchup like this, Crute isn't going to present the biggest of wrestling threats. He is good on the ground, but I can't see him sort of dominating Prachnio like all his other opponents have. And if it lets stand on the feet, I think Prachnio will be slightly better and even might get a finish, but I think it's unlikely in this fight. But either way, I think Prachnio will outvolume his way to a decision win here, so I'm going to go with Marcin Prachnio by a decision win for this one. And closing out the early prelims, we have Adam Fugitt versus Islam Dulatov. So Fugitt had some really tough opponents in his run at the UFC, with his debut being against Michael Morales. Granted, Michael Morales' debut as well, but still very tricky fighter, especially recently we've seen how good he is. Where to his credit, Fugitt actually put up a good fight early on. He took the first round, but as the fight went on, Morales just started picking it up on the feet. In the third, bombarded Fugitt with a flurry of punches that ended up dropping him, and then he had the fight finished with some follow-up ground and pound. Fugitt also went up against Mike Mallet, another really talented welterweight, but in this fight it wasn't nearly as close. Mallet dominated Fugitt in the first with some wrestling, and then in the second he knocked Fugitt down with a brutal elbow straight to the head, dived in, locked in a guillotine pretty easily, and then submitted him midway through the second. And while Fugitt does have some good wins in his career, with his most recent being against Josh Quinlan, these aren't the toughest of opponents, and with the Quinlan fight, it ended up going to a very close split decision that you could honestly argue Fugitt maybe could have lost. I mean, it was really close. There wasn't really much to score on. And while he does lose to the best of the best, his wins aren't the toughest of competition. His opponent Islam Dulatov debuting in the UFC after a really impressive performance on the Contender Series, where he hurt his opponent badly almost instantly, pushed him up against a cage where he dropped him, and then as the fight went on he just kept pushing forward, got him up against the cage again, and then put him out cold with an elbow straight to the side of the head. A very, very impressive knockout, one of the best I've seen on the Contender Series. And while I don't usually think an impressive finish on the Contender Series will necessarily translate to a good performance in the UFC, Dulatov was absolutely dominant that whole fight. He was constantly pushing forward, putting pressure on his opponent. He looked very, very good in the striking, and he looked very dangerous. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Islam Dulatov by a round 1 KO for this one. Now we move on to the prelims, and opening up the prelims is Ateba Gautier versus Robert Valentin. So Ateba Gautier only one fight within the UFC against Jose Daniel Medina, where he absolutely beat up on Medina for the short duration the fight lasted. He backed him up against the cage late in the first, put him out with a flying knee straight to the head, and this was against Medina, who has an insanely good chin. He takes a lot of punishment in his fight, so I don't think he's ever been knocked down, or maybe he's been knocked down very few times, let alone knocked out. And in this fight, Gautier was landing big on him from the jump, landing some nice kicks to the head, nice punches, nice hooks, and then that knee down the middle, brutal, put him out bad. His opponent, Robert Valentin, had a lot of hype riding behind him, coming off tough, with him winning both his fights on that season by really quick finishes. One brutal elbow knockout in the first, and then another very early submission. But in the finals against Ryan Loder, it seemed like he completely changed, with Loder easily dominating Valentin on the ground with some grappling. Took that first round mainly through that. Before taking him down the second, landing a series of brutal elbows and punches that finished Valentin midway through the round via TKO. It was a pretty bad showing from Valentin. In his next fight against Torres Finney, it was very uneventful. Finney pretty much just avoided the fight, constantly taking Valentin down and just holding him on bottom, not even really landing that big ground and pound, or really doing anything with top position. Meanwhile, Valentin was only really landing shots on the feet, but wasn't really able to stay there for very long, would get taken down, and just wouldn't really have an answer to Finney's wrestling. He wasn't really attempting to get up, he sort of just let the rounds run away from him. Finney won that one, split decision, but it was realistically more dominant than the split decision would lead you to believe. But not a good performance from Finney either, just really a nothing burger of a fight. And while I don't think Valentin needs to worry much about the wrestling in this fight or takedown attempts from Gautier, I don't see him being able to really cope with the striking of Gautier. I could see Gautier landing big on him early, sort of throwing him off a little bit, resetting the momentum. And while Valentin is really dangerous, he's very unorthodox in his striking style, I just think Ateba Gautier has him figured out for this one, so I'm going to go with Gautier by around 1 KO for this one. And next up is Francisco Prado versus Nicolle Veretnikov. So Prado most recently took on Jake Matthews at UFC 312 in a pretty run-of-the-mill fight. Neither fighter really had any moments in that fight that were memorable, nothing really round-changing or impactful. Jake Matthews did win that one by a decision, but that was just through looking consistently busier and mixing in some wrestling in the first 2 rounds, but nothing that dominant. Before that Matthews fight, Prado actually fought at lightweight, with his last lightweight fight being against Daniel Zellhuber in a very high volume brawl on the feet. Prado looked good early on, but Zellhuber just started upping the volume as the fight went on, was landing big shots, especially in the second half of that fight, and dealing some really big damage to the face of Prado. Ultimately, Zellhuber won that one by a decision. Before that, Prado did get a first round finish over Otman Azatar, where he landed a spinning elbow flush on Azatar, dropped him before finishing with some ground and pound to get an early TKO win, but this was most likely a one-off because he hasn't really gotten close to finishing any opponents since, so I wouldn't count on a finish this fight. Nicolle Veretnikov, 0-2 within the UFC, with his debut against Danny Barlow ending in a split decision that Barlow just barely took, with the second round being an incredibly close round, primarily just due to the fight being a 1-for-1 trade on the feet for most of its duration, but still, he lost that one. His only other fight was against Austin Vanderford in a fight where Veretnikov was really struggling on the ground, couldn't really get up, and in the second round Vanderford got Veretnikov down against the fence, started hitting him with some nasty ground and pounds. The ref jumped in, stopped it. It was very, very premature, a very controversial stoppage, but either way, I thought Veretnikov would have lost that one regardless, but still weird stoppage there. And while I think this fight will be close, I value the resume of Prado a little bit more than Veretnikov, who hasn't really fought a tough opponent within his UFC run, and he has lost both his fights, especially compared to names like Jake Matthews and Zellhuber, the names that fill Prado's resume. So for that reason, I'm going to go Francisco Prado by a decision win for this one. And next up is Marvin Vettori versus Brendan Allen. This is a very heated matchup. There's a lot of beef between these two fighters. They were originally supposed to fight a year and a bit ago, I think. Vettori pulled out with an injury, and ever since then, they've just been back and forth beef. A fight in a casino between the two of them as well, so I'm actually very excited for this one. Marvin Vettori most recently headlined a fight night against Roman Dolidze when they rematched, and in this fight, he pretty much just got beat up the whole fight. There were moments where he was landing big, especially in that third round, and he did some pretty big damage to Dolidze when he was. But ultimately, it ended in a very dominant decision win for Dolidze, and a similar thing happened before that when he took on Jared Cannonier, where he let himself get beat up the whole fight. You can't really put Vettori away. He has a very, very strong chin. I don't even know if he's been dropped. But in this fight, he just let Cannonier beat him up for the final 4 rounds. He did look pretty good in the first, came up pretty strong, but fizzled out and just let the fight run away from him. He does have some good wins though. He got a win over Paulo Costa where once again it went to a decision, but this time he was able to do enough on the feet for most of the rounds to steal them. And combined with a point deduction, Costa got due to eye pokes. He took a very dominant decision win over Costa in this one. His opponent, Brendan Allen, most recently took on Anthony Hernandez in a fight that the majority of it was spent on the ground, with both fighters trying to reverse position, get top position, try and sneak in some submissions. But ultimately, Anthony Hernandez just looked a bit better in the grappling, combined with Allen sort of giving up position very often and ending up on bottom. And Hernandez took that one by a pretty clear decision. Before that, he lost to Nasruddin Imavov in a fight where it actually remained standing on the feet for a surprising amount of time, with Allen catching Imavov on the feet with some decent shots, some decently hard shots as well throughout the fight. And Imavov not really being able to put Allen out. But ultimately, it was Imavov's superior striking, combined with denying all of Allen's takedowns, that gave him the second round, the last 2 rounds, to win the decision. Allen did beat Chris Curtis when they rematched as well, but in that fight, it was a very close split decision that Curtis probably would have won if the 5th round hadn't resulted in him getting beat up in the final seconds. Chris Curtis had a leg injury. He backed up to the cage holding his leg while Allen just sort of pushed in, landed some really big shots in the final seconds of that round. And that won him the 5th, but outside that, it was very, very close. And while I think Allen is pretty good and that his grappling will sort of present problems for Vettori, if the fight does get taken to the ground, that is, Vettori is really difficult to sort of maneuver with physicality. He's a very physical guy himself and will sort of impose his will on people with sort of his bulkiness and his compactness. And on the floor, I could just see him sort of bucking Allen off or sort of doing anything really to get back to the feet. And I can't really see him getting submitted here. And I think on the feet, he will look slightly better. I think he'll do more damage. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Marvin Vettori by a decision win for this one. Next up, we have Kyler Phillips versus Vinicius Oliveira. So Kyler Phillips most recently took on Rob Font in a matchup that placed Font as a pretty hefty underdog, which at the time spoke more to how good Phillips was. And in that fight, Phillips got beat in the striking as the fight went on, only really looking good with the takedowns, which wasn't his usual style. But still, regardless, wasn't able to take the last 2 rounds and lost that decision. Before that, he took on Pedro Munoz, where his striking looked infinitely better. He won all 3 rounds in a decision just primarily through outperforming Munoz on the feet, landing significantly more big shots and doing more damage just overall. And even before that, when he took on Raoni Barcelos, he beat him up on the feet and even managed to knock him down in the first, with Phillips sort of struggling at moments with Barcelos' takedowns and wrestling, but ultimately he took a unanimous decision win for that one as well. Very solid career, with his striking being what stands out. His opponent, Vinicius Oliveira, only 3 fights within the UFC, and all of them have been decently tricky opponents for someone so new to the UFC. He made his debut against Bernardo Sapage. I think that was late notice, but still, Sapage is no sort of pushover. In a fight where he was getting beat up pretty badly in the first 2 rounds as well. A lot of people remember the flying knee that put Sapage out badly in that 3rd round, but even before that, he was sort of getting hands put on him. But yeah, in the 3rd round, he hurt Sapage, has him backing up. Before the finish, he was also teeing off on Sapage, but when he was backing up, Oliveira landed this flying knee, put Sapage out badly for one of the best knockouts of the year. Following that fight, he took on Ricky Simone in a fight where he looked superior in the striking compared to Simone, landing double the volume and doing some serious damage to the face of Simone with these clean combos. With Simone only really finding success in the 2nd with takedowns, but it still wasn't enough to win that decision. And even in Oliveira's most recent fight against Said Nurmagomedov, he came in with a rib injury and still managed to keep it competitive on the feet, with Said actually putting up a lot of resistance, but ultimately Oliveira won the fight, not only through outstriking Said for most of the fight and doing some real damage, especially in that 3rd, he actually out-grappled Said at multiple points in the fight and almost submitted him in the 3rd, so he does actually look pretty well-rounded. And while Phillips is really good on the feet and will probably give Oliveira a good run for his money in this fight in the striking department, I think Oliveira is the better striker of the 2 by just a small margin. And if that doesn't work, you can always reach into his sort of wrestling credentials to swing the rounds towards him. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Vinicius Oliveira by a decision win for this one. And now we move on to the main card, and starting off the card is Michael Johnson versus Daniel Zellhuber. So Michael Johnson, for a moment in time, it was sort of looking like he was nearing the end of his career. His fight against Diego Ferreira was a pretty bad performance. Ferreira landed this brutal overhand right early in the 2nd round that put Johnson out cold. Had him finished, with Ferreira winning a performance bonus for that one, and Johnson really looking bad in that fight. Johnson did come back, beat Darius Flowers, dominant 30-27 decision by looking better both in the striking and in the wrestling. But Darius Flowers isn't the toughest of opponents. He's 0-3 in the UFC, and in this fight, Johnson was the only person in Flowers' record not to finish him. So, yeah, it's still a win for Johnson, but not as sort of dominant as we're used to seeing against an opponent like Flowers. But recently, Johnson has had a pretty good performance against Ottman Azaitar, where in the first round, pretty competitive on the feet, nothing special happened, kind of just an exchange trade-off. But in the second round, Johnson lands this right hook clean on Azaitar as he's blitzing in. That knocked him down, had him out cold. Very good win for him there, and it seems like he is somewhat back, but we'll have to see. Daniel Zellhuber most recently had one of the most iconic fights in UFC history against Esteban Ribovic at the Sphere, where both fighters were throwing down with reckless abandon, both were doing insane damage, having each other hurt at multiple points in the fight, with a very iconic moment in the third with Zellhuber being really hurt against the cage, but ducking and weaving his way out of there, seconds away from being finished. But ultimately, it went to a split decision. I could have seen it honestly going either way, but I get why Ribovic won that one. But very, very close fight and a very impressive performance from both fighters where they were really putting it all on the line. Before that, Zellhuber had a very good fight against Francisco Prado. That one fight of the night on the card where both fighters were throwing down. Zellhuber looked slightly better in most of the exchanges. He was doing significantly more damage as well. It was showing a lot on the face of Prado, and he won that one by a decision in a very fun fight. And while Zellhuber is very good in the striking, he also has some pretty impressive grappling that he demonstrated against Christos Gigos, where he was beating up on Gigos on the feet the whole fight. He's really good at sort of outdistancing and sticking people at distance with shots. And Gigos shot in for a takedown in the second that Zellhuber locked in an anaconda choke on, rolled him over to get him deeper into it and submit him in the second. Some very impressive grappling displayed in that fight. And in this fight, while I think Johnson can hit very hard, I think Zellhuber is going to be too fast on the feet. He's going to be able to out-volume Johnson while sort of staying at distance and avoiding anything big that Johnson will throw at him. And as the fight goes on, I think Johnson will struggle with the constant pressure of Zellhuber throughout this fight. He might have moments, but I can just see Zellhuber swarming him for the most of the fight and taking this one. So I'm going to go with Daniel Zellhuber. I'm going to say by a decision win for this one. Moving on from that, we have Dan Ige versus Patricio Pitbull. So Dan Ige coming off a win over Sean Woodson at 314, where it initially looked like Woodson was going to win the fight easily using his range. Ige was kind of struggling with the volume and range of Woodson in the first, but in the second, Ige started coming back, landing some really big shots, and in the third, he landed huge on Woodson, had him really hurt, bending over, to which he sort of hit him in the side of the head with numerous unanswered shots that the ref sort of jumped in, caught a TKO. Weird stoppage, I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty early. I think Sean Woodson was recovering a little bit, like it's not like he was fine, but I saw him sort of changing position and I thought he jumped in a bit early to stop the fight. But regardless, good win for Ige. Before they had a really close fight with Lerone Murphy at 308, looking great on the feet early and landing big on Murphy, even knocking him down, which is kind of impressive on someone like Murphy. But as the fight went on, he really struggled with Murphy's takedowns and wrestling and let the later 2 rounds run away from him just through being taken down and being put in less dominant positions, losing the decision on that one. And while he did lose to Diego Lopez at UFC 303, it was on 2 hours notice, and there were moments in that fight where Ige was keeping it really competitive on the feet with Lopez, which is hard to do. Ige was winning the 3rd round as well, not really doing enough to take the other 2, but still a very impressive performance against a top contender on 2 hours notice. So I rate Dan Ige. I think he is very solid. His opponent, Patricio Pitbull, debuted on the same card as Ige, UFC 314, where he took on Yair Rodriguez, and it was a really slow-paced, low-volume fight. We're used to seeing Yair come out, throw these crazy kicks, unorthodox shots, weird elbows. He was very patient in this fight. He was a lot more sort of waiting to counter-shot Pitbull, and Pitbull just didn't really throw much at all. With the 3rd round being an especially bad round, he got caught, he got dropped, he almost got finished with ground and pound. Did find a submission attempt, but didn't get it. Ultimately lost that one by a decision pretty badly. And while I think this fight could be chalked up to Pitbull being sort of a little bit nervous with the UFC skill level, I don't think he's ready for those top-ranked fighters yet. I think giving him someone as dangerous and durable as Dan Ige following that isn't really that great. I do think that this fight will be a bit more competitive. I can see Pitbull sort of coming out of his shell a bit more in the UFC, but I can't see him putting away Ige. And if it goes to a decision, I think that Ige will just be the busier of the 2, with his experience probably helping him out a lot here. So I'm going to go with Dan Ige by decision win for this one. And next up is Kevin Holland versus Daniel Rodriguez. So Kevin Holland, for a time, it was looking like he was near the downward turn of his career. He was sort of on a 1-win followed by 2-loss fighting streak in his resume. And I think the final nail in the coffin, for me at least, was his first round submission when taking on Reina de Ritter. On the feet it was close, I guess, but it didn't stay there for very long. De Ritter took him down very easily, and once Kevin Holland's back hit the floor, De Ritter locked in this really tight choke, submitted him within the first round at UFC 311. Very, very impressive win for De Ritter, and I think it did speak more to De Ritter's skill, because recently Holland surprised me. His performance after that against Gunnar Nelson looked day and night when compared to his prior ones, with Holland winning on the feet, obviously, but even later in that fight, he was actually out-grappling Nelson in the later half, and then some really nice ground and pound from top position, which is weird, because usually Holland's at risk of being submitted whenever a fight would go to the floor, and Nelson is a very tricky guy on the floor. He's very successful with his submission attempts. But Holland took a very clear decision win that fight, and most recently surprised me again at UFC 316, where he was able to get past Vicente Luque. To my surprise, he managed to beat up at Luque on distance, and in the second was the first one to actually shoot in for takedowns, to which he actually got Luque down pretty easily. It's locked in this anaconda choke, submitted him in the second. He looks very much improved. Daniel Rodriguez has been on a pretty on and off streak recently, with his most recent loss coming from Kelvin Gastelum, where on the feet it was fairly even throughout the whole fight, with Gastelum putting hands on Rodriguez a surprising amount. He was actually damaging quite hard there. But when it came to the wrestling and takedowns, Gastelum was dominant. He took a 30-27 decision, with Gastelum just mainly winning through taking down Rodriguez and holding him there. And following that fight, Rodriguez went to an insanely close split decision against Alex Morono, who is really hard to put away and finish immediately and will likely take his fights to a decision, but he's not the most skilled opponent in the world. He doesn't really present much of a finishing threat, and on the feet, he's pretty easy to beat if you can just sort of keep it clean and not get scrappy with him. And it was very even in the striking this fight, with the second being especially bad. It could have gone either way for me, but Rodriguez ended up just taking that decision. But to my surprise, Rodriguez came back very strong. He got an impressive win over Santiago Ponzinibbio recently, where he absolutely dominated in the first round, with Ponzinibbio sort of coming back into the fight in the second. But it was in the third where Rodriguez landed this brutal left hook, put Ponzinibbio out cold. A very good knockout to sort of come off. But I just don't think a win over Ponzinibbio will translate to a good performance over someone as tricky and as sort of hard to predict as Kevin Holland. And while it is possible that Holland will do something stupid and leave himself open to getting caught with something big from Rodriguez, I think that he's learned his lesson, and I think he's going to stay focused at this weight class. He's not going to be moving around as much, taking fights at will. I think he's sort of locked in for this one, and I think he will look better both in the striking, but I also think he might go for some wrestling in this one. So I'm going to go with Kevin Holland for this one. I'm going to say by a decision win. And now on to the co-main event. Paulo Costa takes on Roman Kopylov. So Paulo Costa at a time was a very, very dangerous prospect within the middleweight division. He was riding a 5-fight win streak at the start of his career that led him to a title shot against Israel Adesanya, where he struggled with Adesanya's range. He ultimately lost that fight through struggling to sort of close distance and land big on Adesanya. And the one time he did, he got caught with a counter left hook in the second round. Finished up with ground and pound. Very bad loss for him there, especially so close to the belt. And more recently, he's had some really bad performances. With his fight against Robert Whittaker at 298, he's looking good in the first. He landed this wheel kick straight on the head of Whittaker that looked like it actually did a fair bit of damage. But outside of that, he really struggled to sort of stand on the feet with Whittaker. He wasn't throwing as much and with way less conviction as he usually does. He looked a lot more restrained, which ultimately led him to losing a 29-28 decision through getting outstruck the whole fight. And while his fight after that against Sean Strickland at 302 went to a split decision, it was way more clear-cut Strickland's fight. Costa barely threw anything. He was back up on the back foot for the whole fight, which we really never saw from him early on. And he just wasn't pushing in or trying to land big, with Strickland just sort of marching forward, constantly tagging him with a jab or a teep kick, while really just Costa didn't answer back with anything. Strickland took all 5 rounds in my opinion, just through just constantly pressuring forward while not really being hit with much. Very bad performance, very boring fight in general, but bad performance from Costa there. His opponent, Roman Kopylov, early in his career looked like a complete powerhouse on the feet with a 4-fight win streak, all coming by knockouts or TKOs later in the fight, sort of your second and third round finishes, with his final one being against Josh Fremd, in a fight where in the second Kopylov landed a heavy shot straight to the body of Fremd. It dropped him, put him down, and had the fight finished via TKO in the second. And when he took on Anthony Hernandez at 298, a lot of people thought he would sort of finish him if given the chance on the feet, But Hernandez threw in this sort of wrench in the mix with his grappling. He got Kopylov down kind of easily. And on the ground, Kopylov looked pretty hopeless. He actually ended up getting submitted in the second round in that fight when he got backed up against the cage and Hernandez took the back with a rear naked choke. So a pretty sad performance, especially seeing that Kopylov really had this big hole in his grappling game. And while recently against Chris Curtis, his fight ended via a head kick KO in the third, the stoppage was a bit premature. With 10 seconds left in the fight, Kopylov hit Curtis in the head with a kick. Curtis fell down, got knocked down, and sort of instantly started getting up, but the refs jumped in regardless, stopped the fight. In a very close fight, I had it 1 apiece going into the third, and I could have seen Kopylov winning with that head kick drop in the third, but it would have been nice to see it at least go to the decision, because that's pretty much what it should have been. And in this fight, ultimately, I think it comes down to whether Costa is back to his old self. Whether he'll sort of push in, try and land these big shots as he used to, or whether he'll stay on the back foot. Because if he stays on the back foot the whole time, I could 100% see Kopylov catching him with a kick to the head, or a nasty shot to the body that sort of weakens him. But I have faith that Costa's going to come back. He's going to blitz in, try and land big. And I don't think he will finish Kopylov, but I think he will just amount up a lot of damage as the fight goes on. So for that reason, I'm going to go with Paulo Costa by a decision win for this one. And now on to the main event for the BMF title. Max Holloway versus Dustin Poirier 3, the trilogy in Dustin Poirier's retirement fight in Lafayette, Louisiana. Max Holloway most recently took on Ilia Topuria at UFC 308, where to everyone's shock, Topuria actually did the impossible. He cracked the uncrackable chin of Max Holloway, being the first person in UFC history to knock out Max Holloway, let alone drop him as well, I think. I think he was the first to also drop Holloway. But outside the finish, which was very impressive, there were moments where Holloway was looking good in that fight, especially in the second where he was staying at distance, popping the jab straight to the center of Topuria, and then also landing teep kicks and leg kicks to the front leg of Topuria while staying at distance, which sort of removed a bit of his power. Before that, he had one of the most iconic fights in UFC history against Justin Gaethje at UFC 300, where it stayed on the feet for all 5 rounds, and Holloway was absolutely teeing off on Gaethje. He broke his nose late in the first round, and from there, Gaethje never really found a recovery period, with Holloway sort of battering him with punches throughout the fight and body kicks and leg kicks. Until the last 10 seconds, Holloway points at the ground in one of the most iconic moments in UFC history. They meet in the middle, they start trading, and with 1 second left, Holloway knocks out Gaethje for the BMF belt. It was a probably one of the best fights I've seen in UFC history, and an amazing performance from Holloway. And while I initially thought that Holloway wasn't going to perform well against Poirier because it is his retirement fight, I thought he'd take it a bit easy on him, considering it's Dustin's last fight. He's a legacy fighter. Recently, I remember the Korean Zombie fight, and I think that's not going to be the case. In that Korean Zombie fight, Korean Zombie's last fight, and on the feet, Holloway was teeing off on him. It looked like day and night skill-wise, and then in the third, he put Korean Zombie out with this brutal overhand right that knocked him out cold, in a very impressive win where he didn't hold back. Dustin Poirier most recently made his last run at the UFC belt against Islam Makhachev at UFC 302, where he was getting outstruck on the feet at points, admittedly landing big occasionally, but would be taken down every round on the ground, and Makhachev would just dominate him. Which ultimately culminated in Makhachev locking in this Darce choke in the 5th round and submitted Poirier, but Poirier most likely would have lost the decision regardless. But either way, kind of a bad performance from Poirier. He didn't look as amazing as he used to in that one, and he was getting outstruck, which was surprising to me. To get the title shot, Poirier did have a good performance against Benoit Saint-Denis at UFC 299, where he put Benoit Saint-Denis away with this brutal right hook in the second, put him out cold. But admittedly, there were also points in this fight where Benoit was putting hands on Poirier, and it didn't help that there were rumors that Saint-Denis had a staph infection and was sort of struggling with the antibiotics. And also in hindsight, I mean, Benoit Saint-Denis isn't the toughest of opponents. I mean, Moicano made it look just as dominant, and he's not really Poirier level when it comes to his fight game, so that does also worry me a little bit. And while he did win the first fight with Max Holloway at lightweight in the second time they fought, for the interim lightweight title, the fight was decently close. Poirier had Holloway hurt early, which made sort of everyone remember those moments where he almost dropped Holloway. But Holloway sort of picked it up in the sort of later rounds, and it did appear like he was struggling with that new weight class. Now he is definitely spent some more time at lightweight and is a lot more sort of lightweight weight compared to sort of just a fat heavyweight. And that second fight was really close. Holloway really picked up in the later rounds, and while I think this will be a close fight, similar to what the second was, I can see Holloway looking consistently better throughout this fight, mixing up his shot selection, kicking to the body, kicking to the legs, peppering the jab at distance, because he is a bit taller than Poirier. And I could see him just constantly giving Poirier something to worry about. Meanwhile, I think Poirier will have his moments, maybe landing a nice hook combo against the cage, or, I don't know, maybe even dropping Max. We don't really know how Max's chin's fared up since that KO. And he might even mix in some grappling, but in the end, I just think Holloway will present this constant threat, just constantly be peppering at distance, constantly be kicking at the legs, trying to take them out from under Poirier. And for that reason, I think he'll just look a little bit better consistently, and we'll take this one by a decision win. So I'm going to go with Max Holloway for this one by a decision. So that's it, guys. Those are all my picks and predictions for UFC 318. Right now on the screen, all of my predictions, all of Cam's predictions. Originally, I kind of shit on this card. I didn't think it was that great. It doesn't really have the name value. I mean, the fact that Costa versus Kopylov is the co-main event really doesn't help. And, you know, I've kind of come around to it. The prelims have some really nice fights. I don't know why Vettori versus Allen isn't on the main card. But outside of that, there are actually some pretty good fights earlier on. And who knows, the performances could be really good. I'm excited to see how Poirier will do in his retirement fight. I don't think Max will definitely win it. I think it's going to be very, very close. But very excited to see how this one goes down. Breakdown video later this week after the event. And yeah, bye-bye.